Today, I'm doing a crash course. We're doing a holistic crash course on human design. I was inspired when I saw these transits. If you look at the screen now, you'll see something called a foundation transit chart. Now, this was my chart at the time of recording this video. Maybe a little bit earlier, but thereabouts. This chart is very profound and it impacted me in such a way that I just had to share. And so as this is a crash course, we're just gonna dive right on into it, and I'm gonna share as much as I can with you in the most reasonable amount of time. We're gonna aim for about an hour of time. And I'm just gonna share with you what I see when I look at a chart. So right here, we see 3 different charts. So if you look all the way on the left, you'll see my name, and you'll see a chart with 3 undefined centers. Now this is my conventional chart. We'll focus mostly on this one to begin with. So I'll just zoom in there a little bit. And what we can see here with those 3 centers undefined, on a very simple and fundamental level, means that there are 3, count them, 3 quantum themes that my mind has used in creating its conditioning. On the most general level, when our mind looks out and we see the world, we're seeing what we're not. We see our conditioning. We see what becomes our conditioning. And this is all in these open centers and undefined gates and channels. Now, what do I mean by an undefined center, open gate, or channel? So there are 9 energy centers in this photo right here. I won't go over all the little details, but we will dive into things that are pertinent and valuable, that I can expose big truth about these little things. And so something you'll see about me that's very key is that I'm a simple split. That means that I have 2 sections of definition that aren't connected to each other. And so a definition is what happens when 2 channels come together, or rather, a definition is what happens when 2 gates come together and make a channel. If you look on the left in my chart, you'll see number 16 at the top left from the throat, aiming down towards the 48 in the splenic center. See, now this is a very important channel for me personally. I had always thought, for a long time, I thought I had 3 activations in gate 48, for example. And then just the other day, I was really looking into it more and more, and I counted multiple times, and I only saw 2. I only saw 2 activations in there. And the 48 is the gate of depth. The 48 is the well. Now this well, gate 48, is sitting in the splenic center. The splenic center is the home of existential survival awareness. This is the beginning of logic. This is the beginning of taste and smell. This is where our immune system comes from. Now bear in mind, I'm talking about the splenic center here. This isn't necessarily exactly the spleen, but on an energetic level, we're talking about a quantum theme called the spleen. Definitely connected to the organ itself it's named after. But we're talking about a quantum energy here that gave birth to us in a sense. It is the beginning of awareness within the human system. For you see, there are 3 centers that operate as awareness centers. When we're looking at the bottom left, we see that splenic center. This is the first awareness center. Existential survival awareness. This keeps us alive and not dead. It sees things in a perspective like that. Happens once, that's all it is, ever, right now. And connecting to my throat, this is not a center of awareness. The throat does not bring awareness into the equation of what it means to be a human being. This is the center of manifestation, of metabolism, of transformation. So when you put those two centers together via my channel of the 1648, you're seeing something called the channel of the wavelength. This is called a design of talent in the classical rave I Ching as Rata. So when we're looking at this channel, we're seeing something that needs time to perfect itself in its expression and capacity to pull from the unknown something new. And when you look at the specific imprint I was given, the activations I was given relative to this channel, we see that there are 3 activations, as I mentioned previously. There's one in the 16, this is a 16.3, and this is actually my design earth. This is my design earth is the 16.3. And then when I look at the 48, there are 2 different activations for this 48. I won't go into where they come from because that's not important. What is important right now is that there are 2 activations in this 48 and 1 in the 16. Now in the 48, there is one that is unconscious and there is another that is conscious. You see, when we have an activation, it can be one or the other. And it's because of a planet or heavenly celestial body influencing us at the moment of our birth. And so when we're looking at my 48, we see that it is both conscious and unconscious in the gate of depth, the well. Right here we're looking at a personality 5th line and a design 1st line. Not for me holistically, but for my spleen, for my splenic center, it is only a 5-1 in gate 48. Now what does that mean? A 5-1. What do I mean by that? Well, when you look at one of these gates, you know the numbers, there's 64 gates, comes from the ancient Chinese I Ching. And there are 64 fundamental ways that energy can relate to itself in the human biology. The Chinese recognized this a long time ago. And we've been utilizing this system evolutionarily ever since. However, it changes over time. And that's what this knowledge is about. Human design and rave sciences are bringing into light a whole new dimension of perception
that is completely unique to each individual being.
And so when we're looking at that 16.3 on the other side, let me not get ahead of myself. Back to that 48 in the spleen. This is a 5-1. I want to talk about what a 5-1 is. Because very often, we're not talking about just a certain activation in a certain center and how it lines up. Often, if we're using the term 5-1, this is because we're saying that someone has a genetic profile of the 5-1. So when we're looking at those gates, there's 64 of them, and each gate has 6 different lines. And each line is a different flavor on that gate. Now the first line is the foundation of the house. The second line is the first floor with a window looking in. The third line is actually the top of the bottom floor. It's like the ceiling. The fourth line is the beginning at the ground floor of level 2. It's a harmony to the first line. And then that fifth line is another main level with a window. This time it's looking out and pulling things in. And finally we have number 6 at the top, at the roof. This is the beginning of the next cycle, genetically speaking. Because when we're looking at a hexagram, when we're looking at a gate, we have 6 lines that make up this house. And they all come together to make up a piece of genetic information. The first is the foundation. The fifth is the example of the highest projection for that thing. And the sixth is part of a whole different process because it actually jumps off the roof and it becomes the foundation for the next gate before it jumps off the roof again. You know, genetics, a beautiful stepping stone staircase ladder that we've been evolving through for billions of years. And so a 5-1, with the design of the first line, this is a design, this is an unconscious, this is a body that is foundational, that is intellectual, that is fearful, that is deeply, deeply afraid of things. And because of this fear, it quenches it through investigations and discovers intelligence. And when we move over to the fifth line in the personality, the fifth line, this is the exalted line. The fifth line is the very top of the projection field. The fifth line receives all the credit. The fifth line receives all the expectations. The fifth line is burned at the stake if they're not practical. For you see, it is the job of the fifth line to universalize, to create something that could be applied to anyone, anywhere, anyhow, that we can follow logically forward. This is so valuable to us as people, to be able to have sources of information that can create a blanket statement that we can use most of the time, and it'll work out. The sixth line is where things become hyper personal and specifically perfect. But in that fifth line, it's all about universalizing and creating something that can be applied by basically anyone, something that's practical. The fifth line is often called the savior or the heretic. It's a very profound profile. Ra-Uru-Hu, the man who brought this knowledge to us, was a 5-1 splenic manifester. And so if you look at my design, I am not a splenic manifester. However, I do have a defined spleen with activations of a 5-1. So it makes sense that I would be able to actually understand and comprehend what the man had to say. Most people got caught up in little details that don't matter to anything. But that's neither here nor there. What's important to us is crashing into this information and discovering new things every moment so that we can live the best possible life. You know, that's what I'm here for. So I want to take a moment now. If I was doing a reading with you, I would ask if you had any questions, or maybe you would have said something at this point and we could dive into something for you. But right now, this is just me pulling myself apart and sharing with you what we discovered, you know? My 16 is 0.3. So gate 16 is, well, you know, I forget the classical name, but it has to do with identification and trying things out. The 16 is kind of like a bucket, and you lower it down into the well of the 48, and then you pull it up and you discover something. What is there? What did we find? Every time it's different. It's an existential manifestation. My 16 happens to be a third line. And now a third line is what is commonly referred to as the martyr. I prefer the term anarchist. I find that's much more suitable to my nature. When I was younger, I was more tempted to tear down false foundations. Because, you know, as a 1-3 profile, my genetic profile is that of a 1-3. My personality is a first line, and my design is a third line. And as an investigating martyr or an investigating anarchist, in my youth, I had problems with false foundations because I couldn't rely on that. And so I just let go of everything till I found these, you know, computers. I found technology, and I learned logic by practicing and playing around with these wonderful toys. And so I just kept diving in and diving in and diving in. You see, I have a defined sacral center. And so we'll just take a moment and look on the other half of my split. Right now, we've only looked so far at my 1648. And now that's the smaller aspect of my regular definition. When we look at my personality, and when we look at the synthesis of personality and design, we're looking at the bottom right of my chart. And we are seeing 1, 2, 3 channels. We see 3 channels connecting 4 motors. 4 different motors that push matter. 4 motors that push energy and the body one way or another at one time or another. Mechanically speaking. So I'll begin with the sacral. The sacral center, this is where the life force energy comes from. We also call this prana. And this energy is generated within the sacral. This is somewhat similar to the manifestation of the throat. And in modern times, we've become more interested in manifestation as opposed to generation. However, in this beautiful synthesis between left and right, we have access to the blend. We can manifest and generate together as people and discover the surprising satisfaction of peaceful success as one family.
Oh yeah.
That's my vision, at least, that I'd like to share with you, if you're open.
Oh yeah.
So that sacral center is connected to the root center via gate 9. Now gate 9, this is a funny one for me. For me personally, this one's really funny. Because I have 9.3.3.3 point unknown in my design. And in this configuration, I believe it is my design sun. Yes, it's my design sun. This is called the straw that broke the camel's back. Isn't that a joy? So what this means for me is that I have a capacity to hyper-focus in on details and lose sight of the big picture. If, and only if, I am in transference. Now what's transference, you might ask? Well, simply put, there's something called color. You know, the thing that paints our lives. And color is inherently unstable. It is prone to transfer from one side to the other and back again. You know, neutrinos fly at 90% the speed of light, programming our consciousness one at a time, tiny microscopic particles. So color is inherently unstable. And very often we're talking about line 1 to line 4, line 2 to line 5, or line 3 to line 6. You'll notice I'm speaking of the house structure of genetics known as the hexagram, or the gate from the ancient Chinese I Ching. And so that metaphor of genetics is extremely valuable in discerning the differences between each and every individual. And by looking at these charts, I can just kind of dive in and not simply explain, but interpret. You see, as a system of interpretation, this gives me an opportunity to look at the formula that I've been taught and to share it with you logically to the best of my ability. You see, I've been following my strategy and authority for about 2 years now, maybe something like that. I lose track of time at this point. Within my deeply logical awareness, I've come to recognize time as a measurement of change. However, design, this map right here, right there, this map, when it permeates your awareness and you know enough about it that you could teach a child, when you've reached awareness about yourself and about the world and the truth, how life works, you start to see it everywhere, and you can interpret for yourself. You can speak for yourself. You see, there's a challenge in our world today. There's a real challenge, and I'm going to put this down for a moment. There is a big challenge in our world today. You see, I just dived in for a moment, maybe, what was that, 20 minutes. I just dived in for 20 minutes so far. A little bit on my chart. We haven't even looked at the transits, and the transit is what sparked all of this for me.
In the most recent history of eternity.
And so I want to be able to take a step back for a moment. Experience life from a 3D perspective, from a 4D, from a 5D, 9. We're going all the way. There is something called juxtaposition theory. Have you heard of this? Perhaps somebody has told you what a juxtaposition is, linguistically. When two things are brought together, compared and contrasted, and a relationship is perceived between the two. You see, this can happen between any two anythings, anywhere, anywhen, anyhow. Juxtaposition. And in the unified theory of everything known as juxtaposition, there are 9 dimensions, fundamentally. The first 4 we know all about. Length, width, depth, time. Basic. We've all heard of that. Relativity. Life on the surface. This is a wonderful place of relative objectivity. Let me say that again. The surface is a space of relative objectivity. So facts are relative. That's how it's possible for someone to even conceive of the idea of an alternative fact or fake news or any crazy bullshit. Sure. You know? We can make anything up in this life. And that is the beauty of these minds, of this conceptualization process within our advanced prefrontal cortex that evolved somewhere around 80,000 years ago when the larynx dropped and we began to linguistically comprehend and communicate. We began to plan for the future and recognize the past. We began to engage in fantasy And we benefited from it. All of a sudden we could kill larger animals and feast. We could plant crops and we didn't need to kill. However, evolutionarily, there is a track we've been upon. And if I take a step back, before we even learned to speak, there was the Neanderthal. And so this was believed to be a five-centered being and an all-right being. And so the right is where receptivity comes from. This is the feminine essence. However, when that mutation in the larynx occurred around 90,000 years ago, the masculine was brought in on a whole new level with the seven-centered being, the Homo sapien. The Cro-Magnon man, as modern science likes to call him. I should say pre-modern science. It's not rave science. We are a nine-centered being. The seven-centered being is actually extinct. It has been for over 100 years. However, we are living in the remnants of what the seven did to the five. So much has happened. We don't know. We can't say everything. What we can say is that when we're looking at our history, the seven-centered being was strategic and left in its method. They created weapons. Did you know? Before them, the Neanderthal was creative as well. They created music. They could dance around the fire. Presuming they even had a fire. I can't say I'm certain one way or another if the Neanderthal had fire or not. What I can say is that when that seven-centered being came around, the Cro-Magnon, they made spears, they killed other humans because they were in our way. And if you're in our way, and I need to survive, it becomes life or death. And the seven-centered being was all about that. This is where the manifester was king over all the generators. Perhaps they had a reflector hiding in the back, guiding them on what to do. The wizard, you know, the unknown one. But then something mysterious, strange, and magic happened. And this was recent. This was 1781. Pluto, the planet Pluto, entered gate 41. And I don't care if you consider it a planet or not, I do. So the planet Pluto entered gate 41 in the cosmic wheel and brought death, new truth through rebirth of a brand new process. And with this, the first projector was born. The manifester is retired, officially. And so if you find yourself with the design of a manifester, and you're not living the life of someone who is retired, who is loving their life in every moment, you're missing out, because you don't have any work left to do. Your kind has done their job. You did great. Just inform other people before you make big rash decisions, and they'll appreciate you for it. Most of us are generators, like me. We were told what to do forever. And now we can awaken from the inside. There's something called strategy and authority. This is type strategy and inner authority. Now this is a teaching Ra gave after he discovered there was such a thing as the inner circle and the outer circle. Type strategy and inner authority sounds repetitive because it is the summary of everything he ever said for people who don't give a shit. For people who don't have time. Just follow your strategy. Listen to your inner authority. Your life will improve. It's just physics. It's biology. It's how life works. And I'm not saying this just because Ra Uru Hu told me this when I listened to him. I'm not. I'm saying this because I live my strategy and authority each and every day. That's what brings me here right now to talk to you and to invite you to reach out to me so we can begin this process on an individual level. And I can open this door for 2027. So much is coming. So much is going. 2027. What can I say? When I was growing up, I was born and raised in Alaska. Land of the ice and snow, polar bears and penguins. Very cold. More moose than penguin, I must admit. But I found myself in my own space a lot, engaging in my fantasy, as I enjoy to do. Just a daydreamer, sharing something with you. And so today, we're opening into this space. And when I was a child, I remember watching X-Men. You know, the mutants. Those who have changed biologically into something different. And if you try to repress them, they will kill us. But that's out of necessity. Just like a wounded animal, if you attack and try to kill it, it will kill you first, if it can. This is life or death, after all. Ain't nobody got time for that. And so, in the modern world, one of my favorite animes is My Hero Academia, because every person is born with a quirk. Some don't recognize it, perhaps their entire life, and they think they're quirkless. But everybody is born with a unique potential for differentiation. And by feeding this, by living through inner authority and following the true self within you, living your best life, you awaken unique tonal intelligence within your design. And your personality is free from its limitations, from its constraints, from its responsibilities. There's nothing to do, there's nowhere to go, there's nothing to see. There's nowhere to be, but there's everything to see. For you see, it's all about seeing. And if you can see no thing, you can appreciate everything for what it is. And so what I like about X-Men and My Hero Academia is that it demonstrates that we are different. You are not the same as me. What I can do, what I'm good at, is not the same as what you're good at. I could never tell you what to do, other than be yourself. And when I translate being yourself, making decisions correctly as yourself, into design, it's just type strategy and inner authority. That's just formula. In the ancient teachings, in the ancient classical yogas, we taught surrender, we taught ahimsa, we taught many wonderful things. But what will apply to you?